Hey, welcome back. It's April 5th, and I just want to give you just my take as to how I would interpret the actual historical bloodbath in all the financial capital markets around the world, predominantly the US, but we are seeing, unfortunately, this rippling effect of this stock tumble as we speak. Now, it's not all doom and gloom, and we have to actually take the good with the bad. I'll explain what I mean by that, because there is that sign of optimism, particularly around Bitcoin, as we're weathering this storm. So let's jump into the details next to explain what I actually mean. Okay, I just want to show you the actual impact of these tariffs based on the results that we are seeing in the stock market. So by looking at the capital financial markets in the US, so we look at the major indices like the Dow Jones, you can see during the course of the last 5 days, it's dropped almost 7.5%, which is down by 3,100 points. Horrendous. Similarly, if you go into the S&P, it's dropped 8%, almost 500 points. And similarly, if you go into the NASDAQ 100, again, 8% drop in the past 5 days, losing just over 1,500 points. This is absolutely horrendous. And I'm not going to go through the details on the other foreign capital markets, whether it's the European stock exchange like the DAX and CAC, German and French, and the FTSE 100 in the UK and the Nikkei, Pan and so on, because they're in an awful shape. Now, I'm going to explain in a moment why I think there is this optimism, rapidly seeing Bitcoin as that safe haven asset. Now, before I do that, I want to touch on what is uniquely different about a handful of equity stocks that have actually done the homework and adopted the Bitcoin standard before I actually go on to the Bitcoin thesis of mine. Now, as you all know, Michael Saylor, through his MicroStrategy, now it's rebranded to Strategy, as we all know, you can see is in the opposite direction, almost 4% growth during the past 5 days of this bloodbath week. Why is that? Well, it's because Michael Saylor has been the greatest advocate in terms of all of the major publicly listed companies to have actually adopted the Bitcoin in their corporate treasury reserve. And given that Strategy has in its corporate stash over 500,000 Bitcoins in their holdings reserve, it's no wonder that they're weathering the storm much better than the rest of the non-Bitcoinized companies who haven't actually followed the Strategy playbook example from Michael Saylor and his company. So the results clearly speak for themselves. And it'll be interesting to see the actual explanation that Michael will formally give to analysts when he's expected to deliberate on their next quarterly call results during the weeks ahead of us from this bloodbath, which is still unfortunately going on because Trump is still continuing on with his tariff enforcements. And it'll be interesting to see how this is actually will play out in terms of how these companies, the ones that are not Bitcoinized, i.e. not adopted the Bitcoin, how they're faring in terms of their quarterly results versus the MicroStrategies or the strategies of the world who have made that Bitcoin standard decision. So this is for me a very clear direction that companies who have done the legwork, who have been courageous enough to adopt the Bitcoin standard, not as the predominant asset class in their corporate treasury, but at least a proportion amount on Bitcoin, they're the ones that are going to be the best companies to weather this storm, and indeed any future crises of this nature or any other dumbfounded policy that any dinky old government out there decides to impose, whether it's Trump or non-Trump in any nations. I couldn't care less. This is the tremendous lesson learned in black and white that if companies adopt the Bitcoin standard, their corporate stash, in order to circumvent or become more prepared, more immune against these black swan macroeconomic events that are pretty much man-made, nothing to do with the actual performance of the companies, nothing to do with the actual reports or job stats or inflation stats, nothing of that nature. It's completely driven by one man and his administration, unfortunately. So what I'm trying to say is if companies follow the suit with Strategy, which I think is going to be a lesson learned for them to start ramping up the Bitcoin standard activity for the rest of the other publicly listed companies and indeed private equities to do just that. So that is a catalyst that I'm going to see coming from this tariff imposition by Trump in the days and weeks ahead of us. So that's the first good news. And this is obviously going to have a major repercussion effect for the rest of us Bitcoin holders, because as we know, as there is more purchase of Bitcoin on any company's corporate stash, and given that there is this 21 million coins ever to be circulated, there's going to be that supply shock, which will inevitably translate itself at the end of the day, a major Bitcoin price spike for the rest of us Bitcoin holders. So that is the tremendous good news. That's part one, good news. Part two is what I want to show you next. With Bitcoin, during the same 5 days week, you can see again, is actually the best leading asset class in human history to have weathered out this storm. Instead of finding itself in the red, you can clearly see it's hovering just 1.5% growth during this past week. So it's actually added $1,200 per coin as a result. So what does this tell us? Well, for me, it paints a clearer picture. What we are beginning to see right now is the divorce from Bitcoin away from TradeFi, which is ultimately what it's meant to achieve, right? It's always meant to be that grassroots, this bottom-up asset class, which is provided by the people for the people, not for the elite or for the collective. This is the pattern that I expect that this is going to be made even more clear as we unfortunately going through this repercussion effect of more bloodbath, more drops in financial markets, until such time this single politician decides with a magic wand to make a U-turn, which he has to at some point. And given that Bitcoin is demonstrating itself to become increasingly more of a risk-off asset, more of a decoupled asset away from TradeFi in its own decentralized realm, which is where it ultimately belongs and no other place, well, I think this is a lesson learned for all of us, that we should rethink our situation, rethink the state of rebalancing perhaps some of our portfolios, particularly those who haven't yet invested in Bitcoin, to perhaps consider parking some of its wealth into Bitcoin and keeping it to the long term. So that is the message I want to leave you today. And before I actually end this episode, one other further news. If you look at gold, which is by the gold bug supposedly the only true hard asset on earth, which is completely dumbfounded. If I just do a comparison, right? So during the last 5 days, I'm going to measure and prove to you that gold has been falling with respect to Bitcoin. Now, I'm going to measure and prove to you what I mean. As you can see, it's lost $108 per ounce of gold, which is a drop of 3.5% during the past 5 days, as you can see here, with a volume of 1.38 ounces of gold. So what does this mean? It's no longer a hard asset, it's a fallacy. Nowhere near on the 1.5% growth of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin during these past 5 days have actually favored even better than gold. As you can see, gold has lost 3.5% during this turmoil week. So for me, the pattern is fairly clear that not gold, not any other equity stocks who haven't adopted the Bitcoin standard are going to be in a better position than the rest of the companies who have adopted Bitcoin in its corporate treasury and Bitcoin holders themselves. So the message is clear for me that we're going to see this final divorce of Bitcoin from TradeFi, and is rapidly becoming that immune asset away from the clutches and shenanigans of any policy decisions, no matter how unfavorable or favorable they may be in the eyes of the investors. It's clear to me that Bitcoin is becoming that safe haven asset. That is ultimately what I'm trying to explain to you, and why you should consider more than ever before to start parking some of your wealth. Start off with a small amount and put it into your portfolio, to hold it into the long term. I'm keeping it minimum 10 years. Do the legwork research, and you'll be more convinced, as I am, that Bitcoin is the best safe haven asset and hedge against any arbitrary policy decision by any politician out there. So that is the message I'd like to leave you today. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to hit the like button, to share this video to other colleagues and friends. And if you haven't done so already, to please subscribe to my channel, as I regularly publish interesting videos such as these, anything to do with Bitcoin, blockchain technology, and the future of finance. So till next time,